This is where I was headed to. I mean, this is how you get to totalitarianism. You know, it's if you read Political Ponerology, this really interesting book on the psychology of totalitarianism, he argues that totalitarianism is defined by the narcissists and the psychopaths taking over every major institution in society and emerging from the bottom up. The narcissist, there's power is exercised, I think, in those two ways. The psychopath, it's through raw power. It's through bullying, being domineering, trying to get people canceled, trying to get people fired, harassment. The narcissist, I'm borrowing from the Ponerology book. I think the last name is pronounced Lobachevsky. He argues that the narcissists are spellbinders. So they're casting a spell. I mean, speaking of the witch, right? There's a spell cast. And so I think there's like a trance that has come over, it comes over individuals. It's cast by these really charismatic trans leaders, and they sort of mesmerize, hypnotize, put people in a sort of particular state. Seduce,
yes, definitely.
Yeah, and then everybody, our brainwaves get to some level or whatever, and then anybody who veers outside of it and goes, wait a second, this doesn't seem right, then they're there with the bully to keep them in line and make an example of them and scapegoat them in order to create this culture of fear and conformity. So, and we see it in the files. I mean, the files themselves are so chilling. Like, if you were just a scholar of totalitarianism, you know, we spend so much time talking about, you know, those studies that were done in the 50s, the electroshock studies or the prison Stanford experiments. Read these files. You want to see what totalitarianism looks like. Somebody says, hey, maybe we should take a minute and think about whether or not to give drugs and surgery to somebody that has multiple personalities or that's been misdiagnosed.
We'll just get consent from each personality.
That's right. The alters.
Right. Oh my God.
And so then somebody goes, maybe why don't we take, or why don't we have like why don't we actually maybe pause about or think about it? And then there's somebody in the room, in the chat room or the message board saying, oh, how dare you gatekeep? How dare you create barriers to providing this health care just because they happen to have multiple personalities? I mean, it is so crazy. You kind of can't even believe that it's actually happened. Like, if you were to make a Hollywood movie out of the WPATH files, I think you would be like, this is not realistic. Like, this would not be able to occur in today's society. And yet here we are. It's not just occurring.
Now you know firsthand why the Germans didn't wake up in the late 1930s.
Yeah.
It's because they couldn't believe it. They literally couldn't. Now, first of all, they didn't want to believe it, and they put their heads in the sand. You know, but but they also couldn't believe it. There's no way. There's no way that can be happening, and you can understand
and I was there.
Why.
I was there. I mean, I was there like a year or two ago, being like, this can't be true, because if it were true, then we are
someone
already
would do
living.
Something about it.
Or somebody would do something about it, or it would mean that we're living in a totalitarian society already. It would mean that the medical institutions, that it's like a horror. It's like that thing in the horror movie. You get to the middle of the horror movie and you discover everybody's brain has been taken over by the aliens, or it's actually a secret brain swapping exercise. There's some horror in the middle of it. And then you have to figure out how to get out of it, you know, which is, I think, where we are now.
So that's what we're on to. Well, okay. So go ahead.
No, sorry. No, I was going to say, I mean, I think, it seems like we're turning a little bit to how do we handle this. I mean, I think one of the things that the Lobachevsky describes in the Ponerology book, and of course it's just a theory because he couldn't prove it. By the way, he lived through Nazism and communism. He opens the book describing a really lousy academic being appointed as the president of his university in Poland. And the guy was just a psychopath. Like, that's how he made it to that position. And what Lobachevsky's argument is he says—
That could never happen, Michael.
Okay. No, I know you're reading it being like, I think we're there.
Yeah, no kidding. So, we're definitely there.
We're definitely there. So you kind of go once. So he argues very persuasively, I think, that it's not enough to condemn. It's not enough to say this gender mistreatment is bad, it's pseudoscience, it's hurting people. We should definitely do that. But you have to actually do what you're doing, I think, and what I'm realizing I need to do, which is you have to describe the psychopathology quite specifically. You have to describe it. You must, and so in that sense, everybody says, oh, I don't want to get into are they autogynephiles or whatever. Under Lobachewski's view, he says you must describe the psychopathologies of the leaders. You must distinguish between the narcissists, the psychopaths, the psychopathic narcissists. You must describe, I think he would probably go by extension, you must just say these are autogynephiles. These are not actually women. These are people that think they're women and they get angry at you. And the reason they're angry at you is because you deny their fantasy. And you must deny their fantasy because their fantasy is driving such a huge amount of this. And then you must also say to the people around them.
It's perfect narcissistic fantasy, isn't it? Because they're literally in love with themselves. Like literally. That's the fantasy, is that my alter ego is the perfect mate. They're so narcissistic that they transform themselves into their own sexual partner. Right.
That's right.
You don't get any more narcissistic than that. And you think about that, these guys who cross-dress in their 40s and then they have like 3 kids and then they decide to go full woman. And it's like, well, I don't know if you noticed, buddy, but you got a wife and kids. This isn't about you anymore. Who gives a goddamn about your sexual gratification? Like, why does that enter? Well, everyone should be able to do what they want. It's like, how about not the narcissistic psychopaths?
Yeah, well, no, exactly. That's where I was going to go too. I mean, you may know there's this evidence that certain kinds of pornography, I don't really want to get into it, but appear to be creating autogynephilia in men at younger ages. And those are the men that are then entering women's sports with a sense of entitlement that they should be allowed to compete in their sports because they insist that they're women. So
victimized
I think that's
women, even victimized women,
oppressed.
So much the better. Yeah, oppressed.
Yes.
I'm the ultimate in an oppressed woman. Plus, I'm very sexually, attractive.
Yes.
What a deal. You know?
And so I think you have to describe that for what it is. You have to be you have to tell the truth. Again, we come back to, the key is actually telling the truth. And then I think you also have to then look at everybody else and go, you're behaving like a coward. You have got to stop. You're the head of the American Medical Association. You're the head of the head of the Endocrine Society.
Yeah.
Be the president of it, which means you must have courage or step down and allow somebody with the courage.
Try saying no, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think it has to be like I think we have to go unfortunately, and it's going to take some time. I don't think there's any substitute between going institution by institution in the society, explaining what's going on, challenging these leaders. And it's really simple. American Medical Association, you can stop with the pseudoscience and cowardice, or stop being respected by anybody as the American Medical Association. Those are your 2 choices. Like, this can't continue. I mean, Jordan, on the AMA website, they still say that gender medicine prevents suicide. That piece of pseudoscience is still on the website, despite multiple studies showing quite the opposite. So I do think that those are for me, I look at how does this end?
Okay, so let's delve into that. Okay, so let's delve into that a bit more. Okay, so so this has been infuriating me for quite a long time, right? Like, I knew in 2016, when Bill C-16 came out in Canada that mandated pronoun use, I went to the Senate and I said, you are going to cause an epidemic among young women. This is what's going to happen. And the senators, of course, knew better and just, asked me why I was such a mean man and why I was making such a mountain out of a molehill. Right. It's like, well, it's because I can see exactly what's going to happen. And I can actually see why you're doing it, you bloody virtue signalers. Right. You hypocrites. We're so compassionate. It's like, oh, I'll love my son no matter what. And how am I going to demonstrate that? Well, I'll castrate and mutilate him and turn him into a monster, and I'll still love him. That's how wonderful I am. Right. Jesus, man, it's no wonder people can't admit that sort of thing exists, because that's so goddamn dark that it puts almost everything else to shame. You just can't believe that could happen. It happens. Right. And a fair bit. Right. So there are plenty of mothers who will hoist their child's severed body parts up on a flag to signal their maternal virtue. Right. Brutal.
It's unbelievable.
It's
child sacrifice.
Unbelievable.
It's sacrifice,
that's
right?
That's for sure. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's child sacrifice to the demon of pride. That's what it is, and it's bad. Okay, so then I think, well, you know, what do we do? Do we have like a truth and reconciliation, like hug fest? I don't think so. I think we put the people who've done this in prison. I mean that. Like, I think anybody who's transitioned a minor should be, they should lose their license. This includes the counselors. They should lose their license and they should be put in prison. There's no excuse for it. And so I'm afraid that
we'd have to change the laws first.
Yeah, well,
you have to change the laws. I mean, I think if you go stepwise, Jordan, I would say, let's go institution by institution, and I mean medical, sports. You know,
Riley Gaines
LGBT.
is trying to do that on the sports side.
Riley's doing, and she's going to succeed. She's going to succeed. I mean, look, I will say, I think the public is really with us. They're already with us, and they don't even understand, because I think a lot of the public's in denial. But I would say we got to go institution by institution. And then, the laws have to change. I mean, the Republican states in the United States are already changing. We have to complete that. And then we're going to have to go into the Democratic states and explain what's really going on and change the laws in those states. I mean, I think it's a lot harder for my liberal friends and family to justify this medical mistreatment when the National Health Service of Britain says that they're no longer going to do it. I think it's a lot easier for them to, because they're all partisan Democrats, I think it's a lot easier for them to dismiss what's been happening in Republican states because they're just so partisan. But the British National Health Service is different. You know, the Times of London
Britain,
is
right?
different.
Because they did it. They've done it in the Netherlands. They've done it in Scandinavian countries, right? They've pulled back quite, and the Netherlands example is particularly apropos because that's where that bloody so-called Dutch protocol of gender-affirming care came from, right? So for the Dutch to reverse that, and they're quite left-leaning, and so for them to reverse that, well, I understand it's not as signal a reversal as we saw in the UK. Right. And the fact that the Times actually wrote an article and published it was also, definitely worthy of note. Right. Right. But it's going to, like, the problem is that the rot that's generating this thing, the problem is that horrible as this is, it's merely the worst symptom of an underlying systemic problem. And it's even hard to characterize this systemic problem. Well, so here's part of a reflection of that. You tell me what you think about this. So the Democrat, the demographic slice that's most supportive of the Democrats is childless women under 30.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but that's, now forget the bloody politics. We go down to the psychological and the biological level. Like, there's a reason for that. Like, the policies that the Democrats have devised, which are variants of the victim-victimizer narrative, play very well into a misapplied maternal instinct. Because the maternal instinct is find the infant and protect it. It's like, well, I don't have an infant. Well, do you have a dog? No. Well, I don't have a dog either. Well, how about the oppressed? Oh, yeah, I've got the oppressed. Right, exactly. And so now the oppressed are infants. They can do no wrong. Now all we have to do is find the oppressor. This has turned out to be, by the way, quite hard on the Jews, as we're seeing. Right. Because if we're going to play oppressor, oppression, or victimizer, victim, and we do that by classifying disproportionate representation in the upper strata of hierarchies as evidence of oppression and victimization, then the Jews win that contest. Right. And this is not much different, by the way, than what happened in Austria and in Nazi Germany. This is a very old story. Like, I went through, for example, went through the story of Exodus in great detail recently. And the reason the Egyptians enslaved the Jews is because they're disproportionately successful minority. Right. So this has been going on for a very long time.
Yeah. So what